today's episode I'm going to be showing you how to make this kitchen unit. Now for this one I've actually used false drawer and door fronts, so this is going to be super easy to make. You'll find the cutting list in the description box below. So let's get started. So begin by cutting all of the pieces needed apart from those needed for the false drawer fronts and the false doors and mouldings. And once we've constructed the unit, we can then measure the door and drawer openings and get exact measurements for those pieces. I also haven't yet cut the unit top, and I like to leave that until the unit is constructed as well, and again then we can get an exact measurement. I've also sanded each side of each piece using a 500 grade sandpaper and then removed the sanding dust with a dry brush. Now I'm actually going to be using an antique pine wood dye for this piece, and when I'm using a wood dye I always like to apply the wood dye first before construction, and that way it cuts down on the glue residue marks, as wood dye doesn't take over glue. So if you're going to be applying wood dye or wood varnish to your piece, then I would advise applying that to the pieces first, but if you want to paint this piece then you can wait until the piece is fully constructed. So I've got my antique pine wood dye here and I've given that a really good shake, and I want to apply the wood dye to both sides of all pieces. So I've just got my nitrile glove on here to protect my fingers, and I've got a plastic tray here which I'm then going to stand the pieces on whilst the wood dye dries. I've also got a piece of kitchen towel here, and I just put the pieces on there and just gently dab them off once I've applied the wood dye, and that just gets rid of the excess. And then you'll find that the wood dye will dry a lot quicker as well. So that's one coat on each of those pieces. I'm now going to leave those to dry and then we can begin construction. Once the wood dye has dried, and I've left these drying overnight, we're ready to begin construction. And we're going to start by attaching the mouldings to the top and bottom of the back and side pieces. So apply glue to the back of the first moulding. And I've got my mini clamps ready here to clamp the pieces together. So lay that along the top there, and then what I'm going to do is bring in a piece of spare strip wood, and I just like to lay that along the top of both pieces like that and press both pieces up against it. Then you know you're getting that nice flush top edge. And I always like to check both sides of the moulding before I attach it, and then I always attach it so that the nicest side is facing forwards or is visible. And that's a good little habit to get into, so that you've always got the nicest edge of the wood facing forwards. Same with that one. Carefully remove your excess glue. Just hold the piece in place while you do that. Clamp the pieces together. Really important that you clamp pieces, otherwise as the glue begins to dry the piece of wood will tend to curl upwards, and then you'll always be stuck with that gap in. Okay, so that can be put to one side to dry, and then you can do the same thing again with the back and remaining side piece. Once the mouldings have dried into place, we're ready to attach the legs, and we're going to attach a leg to each side of each side piece. So just start by sanding along each edge of all of your pieces, and I've already done mine, but just to show you what I did, hold the piece against your sandpaper like that and just go along in the one direction, and that will just ensure that you've got nice flush edges and none of the mouldings are overhanging, which will prevent the legs from going on nicely. So apply glue to each side of the first side piece. Pop that down and then attach the leg so you've got a nice flush line along the top. Should be nice and flush along there. Push them into place like that. And then what you can do is just bring in a spare piece of strip wood and press everything up against it like that. And then you know you've got that nice flush line. And then I'm going to pop one at each side as well. And then just press those legs into place. So make sure everything's flush against your work surface like that, and then give them a press. And this will apply even pressure all the way along, and it sort of prevents you from twisting them inwards with your fingers. Keeps everything flat. You can then hold on to that and just remove any excess glue. So that piece can then be just pushed to one side to dry, and you can do the same with the remaining side piece. Once you've allowed enough time for the legs to dry into place, we can move on to the next step. And we're going to begin by drawing some pencil lines across the sides and back piece for placement of the shelf where the drawers will sit. So we don't have to do that 3 times, we're going to join the pieces together. So make sure you've got a nice flush line along the top there, and then just pop a little bit of masking tape on. Same at the other side there. And then just put a little piece at each bottom edge as well, just to hold it all together. And then turn the piece lengthways. And we're going to do a line 21mm, and that's 13/16 of an inch from what will become the top edge. So begin by making a little pencil line at the first edge of the wood, just making sure I'm sitting right at the top of the leg there. So 21mm there, 13/16 of an inch, the same at the other end. And then turn it back and join those up. Put the rule just below the pencil lines to allow for the thickness of your pencil nib. And go along like that. If you're using an extra dark wood dye, you might just need to do a couple of lines just to make that a little bit more visible. And you can remove the masking tape. So we're going to begin by attaching the back piece to the first side, and it's going to sit along the inside edge of that back leg. And what I'll do is I'll get it into place and then I'll pick that up and show you what I mean. But if you follow my tutorials, you'll probably already know. Apply glue along that side, and then sit it along the leg. Make sure you've got a nice flush top there. Your pencil lines will line up, and you want to follow the join between the leg and the side piece. Get into place like that, and then sort of have a look from the back and make sure that you're sitting along that line. Give it a press down. Because it's quite a long back piece, it is going to try and fall forwards, but once we sort of get the top piece into place, it will hold it all together a lot more firmly. Get around that back edge and remove any excess glue. And remove anything that's on that inside line as well. So this is a bit fragile at the moment, but if I just sort of pick that up and show you what I mean. So by putting it along the front edge of the back leg, we're leaving that little lip at the back there the same as we've got at the side. Get that back into place and then I'll give it a good press. We're now ready to attach the top piece, and this is going to sit on the inside edge of those joined pieces. So you've got 3 of the same sized pieces left there, so any one of those you can use for your top. So apply glue to a long and a short edge. And attach that into place. So get the piece lined up with the side piece first. Make sure you've got a nice flush line along there. And then pull your back piece in to meet it and see how that will square the piece off. Again, you want to make sure you've got a nice line along that top edge, and especially in that corner as well, where it can sort of tend to try and drop inwards. So just use your thumb there to go along and make sure you've got flush lines, otherwise it will throw out our top piece. So give that all a good press as well, making sure that it remains where it should. And again, remember that your glue is going to take a little bit longer to grab and to dry when you're applying it to pieces that have already been wood dyed or had the wood dye applied. So lay that piece down onto the top, and we're now going to attach the drawer divide. Now this time, instead of doing pencil lines, I'm actually going to use a spacer. So if you measure the top piece, take off the width of your drawer divide, in this case 1.5mm or 1/16 of an inch, and then divide that by 2, and then you'll have that amount of space each side. So in this case the spacer will be 50.5mm, which is 2 inches. So just cut a piece of wood measuring that long, and I'm just using a piece of 1.5 sheet, but it doesn't matter what you use as long as you get that length correct. So I'm just going to pop that in there like that, leaving a bit of a gap at the back so that I can pull it out once I've glued that into place, and then apply glue to a long and short edge of the divide. And then sit that into place alongside the spacer. Press it against the back and then hold it into place and just slide that spacer out because we don't want that to get glued into place. Have a look from the front, make sure you're happy that it's sitting upright, and if not, you can make a small adjustment. And if you're not very good at judging by eye, you can just bring in your smaller rule and just measure that you've got the same distance at either side of the divide, at the bottom and at the top. And then that's a good way of telling whether you need to come over a little bit. Okay. So we're now ready to attach the shelf piece, and this is going to sit above the divide there, and we can use the pencil lines that we've done to make sure that it's staying straight. So again, apply glue to a long and a short edge. And then also apply a bit to the top of the divide. Glue the shelf into place. Press it right into the corner and sort of have a peep at your lines and make sure it's sitting just below that line. You may just be hiding that line. Press it against the top of the divide, against that side as well. Lay the unit on its back and I've just popped that spacer underneath there just to give it a little bit more support, and we can now attach the bottom piece, which again is going to sit on the inside edge of the joined pieces. So once again, apply glue to a long and a short edge. And then pop that piece into place, making sure you've got a nice flush bottom edge. Again, just use your thumb to make sure that that's sitting in the right place there. And then press it into place. Remember to keep removing your excess glue as you go along. Stand the piece on its side and apply glue to the open edges. Like that. We're now ready to attach the remaining side piece. So get it lined up at the top first. Again, making sure you've got that nice flush edge along the top and along the front of the leg there. You can then make sure that the shelf piece is flush, and then the bottom piece, and then press the piece into place. Once you've got it in place, you can have a look inside and make sure that the drawer shelf is staying where it should. And if you need to adjust it slightly, then just do so carefully. Give that a press and hold. Now I'm just going to apply some masking tape, and that can then be left to dry. I'll start with a piece right across the side like that. Pull it nice and tightly, but without knocking any of the pieces out of place. You can then lay that onto its back, and I'm going to put a couple of pieces right across the front. Now this is a low tack masking tape, but if it does remove any of the wood dye, we can reapply, and we're going to be doing that second coat anyway. Pull that nice and tightly as well, and then I'm going to put a final piece right across the bottom edge. Like so. That piece can now be left to dry. So once that piece has dried, we're ready to cut the pieces for the false drawer and door fronts. Now for that I'm using 2.5mm sheet wood, that's 3/32 of an inch. Now I haven't given the measurements for these in the cutting list because I think it's best that you do measure the openings and then cut the pieces accordingly. So for the drawers, just measure the width and height, and then cut a piece. You may need to just take a little bit off each of those measurements, but because this isn't actually going to be like a regular opening drawer, so we don't need to sort of slide it in and out, you can cut it as close to that size as possible, but obviously you need to be able to get that in there and then be able to get it out again. So don't cut it too tight so that it will actually get stuck in there. So that's the drawers, and then for the doors, measure the entire width there and divide that by 2, and obviously your height as well. And then you want to cut so that the shortest edge is in the direction of the grain, so that the grain runs from the top to the bottom of your door rather than going across, and that just looks a little bit more pleasing to the eye. And then obviously cut so that you can get 2 in there. Again, these aren't going to be opening, so we don't need to round any edges or anything like that. So you can cut those as close to the size as possible. So what I want to do is actually put a border around the doors. So I'm going to cut some sheet wood, just from 1.5mm thick sheet wood, that's 1/16 of an inch, to do those borders. So I'll have one around each edge, but I want to apply the wood dye first. Otherwise, again, we'll have those glue marks. So I'll just cut a few strips that will be enough once the wood dye has dried to fit onto the door, and I'll cut those in a moment. But what we're also going to do is just use some little pieces of strip wood to put just on the inside of the door opening at the top and bottom, there and there, for these to stick against, and that will just make them a little bit more secure in there. And we'll do the same for the drawers as well. And because that's going to be hidden, we can glue those into place before applying wood dye. Okay, so I've cut here what I'll be using for the borders for the doors, and once the wood dye is applied we'll be attaching those. But you don't have to have a border. You could score grooves down the door if you prefer. You could do a central beveled area, so just cut a square that's probably 5 or 6 millimeters shorter than your door all the way around and bevel each edge, and then you can stick that on once you've applied the wood dye. So there's different ways that you can do your doors. And then what I'm actually going to use for the sort of door stops and drawer stops is this 3 by 3 millimeter strip, 1/8 of an inch. And I've got my little drawer here where I keep all the offcuts, so I can use up some of those. And to place those, what we're going to do is to make a little pencil mark inside each of those openings, 2.5 millimeters back from the front. So use your smaller rule and sort of get in there and line that up, and then do a little pencil mark at the 2.5 millimeter 3/32 of an inch point. Do that on each side of the door opening, and I'm going sort of level with the rule there, not behind it, because that will be more than your 2.5. Turn that over and do it at the top of those openings as well. The same there, and then in the drawer openings as well, and again at the top and bottom. So I've just cut some of the 3 by 3 strip here, and I'm not even measuring it, but it's probably about 12 millimeters or 1/2 inch long. You don't need too big a piece. It's really just to give the door and drawer fronts a little bit of extra support. And then I'm just sticking that just behind that pencil line. Give that a press down, and then I'm going to do the one at the top of the door opening. Just give that a press. That one just behind the line as well. And then what you can do is actually bring in one of your doors and just prop that into place in front of those little supports, and then just feel that they're in the right place. So we're not going to be able to do this with the drawers, obviously, because we won't be able to sort of get in to do it, but we can do it with the doors, and I actually think that's in just about the right place there, so I'm pleased with those. I'm going to do the other side now. And usually, if I were making a piece of furniture for my doll's house, I would definitely have sort of fully functioning doors and drawers. But for a room box where I'm not going to be altering it or having the doors or drawers open for display, I think it's okay to use sort of false doors and drawers, but it's entirely up to you. And I'm sure sort of if you've seen any of my other tutorials, then you'll know how to do real doors and drawers. So if you wanted to do that, you can. But if, like me, you think, well, you're not going to be changing the display and that it is going to be sort of a permanent display, then I think false doors and drawers are a lot easier and quicker to do as well. So I'm testing that one as well. It does feel a little bit tight from top to bottom, so I might have to sand a little bit off, but the actual sort of stops are in the right place there, so I'm happy with that. And then you want to do the same thing with the drawers. So I've got the drawer stops in there as well. Before you try your drawer fronts in, just make sure that you allow a little bit of time for the glue to dry, otherwise you might get the drawer fronts stuck. But then you can just dry them like that. And that's a nice fit. And that one is too. So if you follow your pencil lines, you should get a pretty good fit. But if you have sort of placed them a little bit too far forwards, then as long as you don't allow your glue to dry off completely, sort of leave it for hours or anything, then you should be able to remove that again, even if you need to just get your craft knife in there and remove that, and then you can stick it further back or further forward depending on where your drawer needs to sit. But I'm really pleased with those. And the doors, let's pop the doors in as well. And you probably could do it without the little sort of strip supports, but this is just going to give a little bit of extra sort of glue in area, and they're going to be easier to get in and get them straight like that, so I would advise using the strip. So what I want to do now is apply wood dye to these drawer fronts and door fronts, and I'm going to pop them onto a piece of card because the back doesn't need to be wood dyed, and that just makes it easier to apply it. And then I'm going to do the strips as well. And then we'll come back and make up the doors. I think I could get that one out then. And get those glued into place. Cut our top piece, and then I also want to apply another coat of wood dye to the entire piece. So I've attached the mouldings, the drawer fronts, door fronts, and also some wooden door and drawer knobs, which I'll be again applying wood dye to and then fitting once everything has been wood dyed. Again, just to sort of get rid of that glue residue from around the outside edge of those. So I'll just pop that to one side, and then I thought whilst I'm getting the wood dye out again, I might as well cut the top. So what I've done is measure across the piece and add 4mm, so 2mm to either side, and then measure the depth of the piece and again add 2mm, and that will allow for a beveled edge. So I've cut the piece here, and now I'm going to bevel one long edge and both short edges. So to bevel the edges, hold the piece at a 45-degree angle and keep it at that angle as you sweep it towards you. And keep going until you've got a nice sharp bevel. Like that. And then do the same at each side. Like that. You can then tidy that piece up in your hand with a piece of 500 grade sandpaper. So this piece is also now ready for wood dye, and I've just made a little masking tape handle on the back there. So just loop a piece of tape and then put a little extra piece each end to hold it in place. And that way you can apply the wood dye around the underside edges, which will be visible once the piece is in place, and then obviously do the other side as well. And that then acts as a prop and you can stand it to dry. So I'm also just putting a little bit of the wood dye around those stops in there, just so that there's no natural wood showing through once I've put the false fronts in place. So that's one coat on all of those pieces. I'm now going to leave those to dry, and then once we've put the unit together, we'll give that a further coat. So all of my pieces are now dry, and I want to start by attaching the top piece to the unit. So begin by applying glue to the top. Make sure you get right along the edges and into the corners. And I've got my masking tape and clamps here to secure this piece once it's in place. There. And you want to attach this piece so that the straight unbeveled edge is flush with the back of the legs. So get that into position. Just use your fingers there to make sure that that is flush along there. And with the back of the legs and not the back of the unit, you'll still have sort of a little bit of an overhang there. And then you'll have an overhang at each side, and that's usually the thickness of the bevel. Get that level on there. Try not to press down on any sort of weak areas, as you might split the wood, but just hold on to that and remove any excess glue. And then what I'm going to do is put a piece of masking tape straight over the top, and then I'm going to use clamps along that front edge. And if the tape pulls up any of the wood dye, we can just touch that in again. just going to put a piece straight across like that, and then just pop some clamps into those drawer openings there, avoiding the little support bits if I can. A bit more glue coming out there, so let me just get rid of that as well. It's always best to get rid of it whilst it's still wet, otherwise it sort of dries and just goes all bobbly. Okay, so that piece can be left to dry. Now I want to prepare the doors. So to prepare the door, bring in your first moulding and lay it along the short edge of the door, so this will be from top to bottom. Use your craft knife to make a little line of where you need to cut, but then move that away from the door to actually cut it, otherwise you might end up cutting into your door, like that. Do the same for the other side. Make sure you've got a nice flush line along the top there. Again, make your little mark and move it away from the door to cut. You can then glue those into place. Make sure you're placing it right along the edge of the door there, again so you're not overlapping it. Press. And get rid of any excess glue. And then bring in the next one, line it up in between those two. Again, make your little line with your knife and then cut it away from the piece. Same at the bottom edge there. And glue those into place as well. Again, make sure you're getting that flush edge along the top there, keeping it nice and square. Remove the excess glue, and then I'm just going to pop a clamp into each corner just to hold those firmly into place. That can then be put to one side to dry. Once the mouldings have dried into place, drill a hole in the centre of the door moulding there, and then you can glue your doorknob into place. And even though it's a nice sort of fit, I always like to just put a little bit of glue in there just to really hold it securely into place. Make sure it's sitting flat along the edge of the door. Give it a press. And again, remove any excess glue from around the edge. And then do the same with the remaining door. So I was going to use the wooden knobs for the drawers as well, but I've actually found these little antique brass drawer pulls in my drawer, so I'm going to use these. So I've just started by making a little pencil mark in the centre of the drawer there, and about 5mm from the top. And you can use your Gorilla Wood glue to attach these, that works well. Just line that up like that. And to check that you're level from the bottom, you can actually just bring in your smaller ball and then just measure from the bottom of the handle down to the bottom of the drawer. That's 10mm, that was a good first go. And then remove any excess glue. If you knock it out of place, just measure again. Once you've allowed enough time for the top piece to dry into place, we're ready to attach the door and drawer fronts. So I'm just going to pop those out of the way. Let's lay the unit down and just apply a little bit of glue to each of those stops. Like that. Take your first drawer and just drop that into place. Give it a press down on the stops there. And what I like about doing it this way is that you can still see the lines around the edge of the drawer, so it makes them look as though they would actually open. Now let's attach the doors. And with my doors, my mouldings were a little bit of an afterthought, so I've only placed my stops here 2.5mm back. I didn't take into account the width of the thickness rather of the mouldings, so they are going to sit forwards a little bit, which doesn't really matter because obviously the unit is going to be face on in our room box. But if you did want to have the doors flush with the unit, then just place your stops a little bit further back depending on the thickness of the moulding that you're using. And again, I'm just going to drop that in there like that, press it against the stops. Make sure it's sitting level, that one as well. And again, you've got that sort of gap in around the edge to make it look like a real sort of opening door. Give that a good press against the stops there. And there we are. So I'm going to let that dry and then give this another coat of wood dye. And there is the completed unit, and that will sit there. And I've also given my sink draining board another coat of the antique pine, just to darken it up a little bit so that it matches the unit a little bit better. I think that looks really good. So in the next episode I'll be showing you how to make a little chair to go in this corner, but until then, take care and I'll see you soon. Bye!